So here we are the day after the national champion Masters 35-39 road race. I got second place yesterday, and I'm very happy with how the race went. I felt strong tactically. It was, I had a great race, and I did everything I could to win, and I was beaten uh, at the finish, but I have no regrets. Um, and it was an interesting race. Um, 2 minutes into the race, a green team member came up to me and he said, "Do you speak Italian?" And right away, I knew what he was saying, but I still said, "No, I don't speak Italian." "Do you speak Spanish?" "No," I said. And then turned to him. I said, "Now you know you can talk tactics around me." And so right away, I knew what was about to happen. And then throughout the race, I saw that become true, that they were basically racing against me, which is 100% fine. That's what you do tactically. But there was always a green guy on my wheel. Usually the green guy wasn't pulling through if there was an attack, stuff like that. Whatever, that's bike racing. But some things happened during the race during the race, I'm happy how I reacted to it. Uh, there was a breakaway early on of 5 riders, and I had a feeling that a breakaway was going to win the race because with the up and down nature of the course, if the group wasn't pushing on those uphill drags without a consistent speed, the gap could just balloon out. So I was a little concerned about that 5 rider group. So I did a couple attacks just to at least try to keep it close or try to bridge across. And I didn't get across, but eventually we did catch that group. And during that process, uh, the green team had a rider in the breakaway, and then I had a green guy on my wheel, the main green guy. And he was yelling at me from behind. He's like, "Hey, I know you know how to do this, but when the motorbike passes you, make sure that you get in their slipstream." And I'm like, okay, right off the bat, I know this guy and I are not going to align because I know that that's part of racing, but at best, it's against the spirit of the race to take advantage of slipstream from vehicles. And at worst, it's cheating and you can get thrown out of the race. So here, this guy is yelling at me to cheat, to go faster, to catch his own teammate in the breakaway because he wants to win the race. And if I was his teammate, I'm sure they already know his character, but wow, I wouldn't want to be teammates with that guy. I try not to talk badly about people, but that was that was something. So again, eventually the Peloton did catch up to them, and they were on my wheel, marking me and not really pulling through. Again, that's bike racing, totally fine. But then my new friend, Scott, who got second in the time trial, he made a move and started to go up the road. And I feel like I could have gone with him or tried to go with him, but I knew if I did, then everybody was that green team was just going to be there and just kind of mess it up. So uh, to put some pressure on the green team, it was great that Scott went up the road. And honestly, I already achieved my goal in the time trial for the weekend, so I would have been happy to see Scott win. And he did a great ride. He was out there for more than a lap, all by himself. He had like a minute at one point. I think I timed it, and he was doing a great job. During that time, the green team wasn't really going to the front, and you could see the main green guy go up there and start yelling at his teammates, "Come on, you got to get up there and do some work," but they wouldn't do it for him. And I made a joke when he came back after yelling at his teammate. I was like, that guy doesn't speak Italian, just to stoke the flames a little bit. Um, so that was funny. But eventually there was a counterattack from the group I can't remember exactly when it happened. There were so many little kind of moves here and there, but I found myself in it. We caught up to the green guy because the green guy was also solo at that point for a little bit of time, but he was a little bit he didn't weigh very much. So with the up and down nature of the course, especially where he broke away, there was a big downhill coming up. So I was like, okay, this is great. Let's get him out there solo for a little bit. He probably isn't going to go too far, especially with that big downhill, the rolling speed of the pack. So that kind of fried him a little bit. But the counterattack picked him up, and then we all did actually work together at that point to catch Scott. And then I think we were maybe 6 riders at that point with maybe a lap and a half to go, maybe a little bit less than that. And then we rotated through, we got our gap, and eventually it ballooned out. So we were pretty safe during the last lap. We didn't really have to worry too much about the group catching us. But still, we got towards the first third of the course where there were the biggest uphills and downhills in the course, like the biggest variation there. And the green team had 2 riders in it, and they were the only team with multiple riders in it. So as they should have, they started to play the game. We were in the pace line, and the green team leader let a gap open up. So it was one guy and then his green teammate that had a little bit of a gap. And I was like, okay, this is the first kind of team tactic thing that they did. So tactically, it was important for me to make a move and try to make them pay for that, because the longer that they were in the group like that, the harder it is for us individual riders to win, obviously. So that was kind of like on a little bit of a downhill where they had a little bit of a gap, the first guy and the green teammate. I was at the back of the group, and we all know this, Jake Castor, my teammate, was just talking in detail in Buffalo about this. If you're at the back of the group, especially me, I was probably the heaviest guy in the group. I gained so much speed on the downhill in the draft. And as soon as it flattened out and went back up, I put out my highest power of the race and went like a minute up this hill as hard as I could. And I didn't get away. That would have been sweet if I was solo. But when people caught back up, I looked back and no green people were there. They both got dropped. Eventually they finished 9th and 10th. So that was a little bit of a side mission for me. I wanted to have a fun race and try to win, but early on, I knew my side mission was to tactically race against the people who were tactically racing against me. And I understand that that's a little bit of wrath, trying to get even with people. But inside of a race, that's a race. It's competition. You try to get to the finish line first. You try to beat each other. The problem is when that continues past the finish line. And I'll get to that later. But that was that attack was maybe 2/3 of a lap to go. And we just kind of rotated through. I had a feeling that I had a good chance in the sprint. So after that, I didn't really do any attacks after that. And we went up the final hill. It's like a minute. There was an attack. I got on a wheel. That guy cramped up at the top of the hill. We still had like 400 or 500 meters to go. I was in second wheel. The winner was on my wheel. So I was in a weird spot because I knew I was going to lead out the sprint. But I also know that I don't really have much snap. So I need a longer sprint. So I started a little bit long, not too long, I don't think, because it was either going to work or not. The guy who won is a really good sprinter. He's a crit racer. So I was hoping maybe just the hard nature of the race, the heat, maybe would sap his legs, but he had plenty of snap in the last 100 meters to come around me. So nothing I could do. After the finish line, I felt a little disappointed, of course, to get so close. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I should back up. Let me fast forward and then I'll get back to that moment. After the finish line, I went back to the result area and the green team came up. I think I mentioned earlier they finished ninth and 10th, so they were off the podium. And the green teammate made a bunch of comments about the size of my testicles. And one time it's like ha ha ha, but like multiple times I'm like, okay, there's like people around. This is inappropriate. The green leader came and he was a little upset, at the race. And at that point, I still felt a little satisfied with inflicting that damage, because of the signs and symptoms of pride that I had noticed during the race. He even said, "Oh, I come from Boulder. We don't have heat like this down there," and already coming up with excuses about why he didn't win and why the conditions didn't favor him, but they favored everybody else. So I felt a little bit of satisfaction still after the finish line, and it even kind of went a little bit longer, a few hours after the race. Eventually I got over it, but that's one thing that I learned and I got to really work on. There's a difference between that sort of thing in the race and then after the race. How long does it last after the race? And that was something that I started to think about after I crossed the finish line in second place. In my head, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so disappointed. I should have done this. I should have done that. I would have had a chance to win if I had attacked more in the last, 7 miles or so. I shouldn't have waited for the sprint. But that is pride coming out in me, instead of accepting the way that I decided to race, which is part of the race. It's not just your legs, but it's also your mind and tactics. That's what I did, and I got beat. And instead of accepting that, I started to make excuses as well. The guy who won played it really smart in the last half of a lap. He made me, I don't know if he meant to, but he made me believe that he wasn't feeling so strong or not feeling so good. And that was a great move. And if I think about it, I did make that attack, 2/3 of a lap to go, and I didn't get away. I made multiple attacks before that, and he was always there. He was always on my wheel. I never got a gap on him. He knew who to go with. He was always there. He was never under pressure and off my wheel. So I was happy to recognize that I could recognize that pride in me and try to work through that as best I could. Yeah. So I guess that's it. I feel like I had a great race, good legs, and great tactics. I did try to attack. I gave my best in the sprint after going up that hill, and that was the best result that I could do. Second place, and where in the past I might have let that kind of wrath and that pride kind of last a long time or a really long time, like the years later think, oh, I could have won if I did that, instead of saying I did my best at that moment and got beat. So I'm happy with that. That's what I've been thinking about today. And I think I'm going to hang up my second place medal on the wall because that was a good victory for me to try to work through that in real time. Yeah, I'm sure those feelings will still come up and everything, but I'll keep working on that. That's the big victory.